Really, the single line?
You're beautiful.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Thank you. I lose all credibility with that. How many single folks we got in here? So let me get a sense of the room. How many 20-somethings? Okay, quite a few. How many 30-somethings? How many 40-somethings? Oh, yeah. 50-somethings? Representing? Anybody 60 and older? Come on. Hey, you're never too old to learn, never too old to learn. So, Brian is so gracious with his introduction. One of the things that I get to do, actually, I spend all of my time putting on leadership conferences. And so there's an assumption I make when I show up in these kind of environments. And the first assumption is that you're a leader. And you may not feel like a leader tonight. You may not feel like you walked in here with leadership capabilities. You may not feel like you're somebody who is leading a team. You may be out on your own. You may be starting something new. But as a believer and a follower of Jesus, we've all been called to lead. So that's one assumption. The second assumption is that God has something spectacular for you. And not just tonight, but in general. We serve a God who's great. We serve a God who is exceptional. We serve a God who believes and wants the best for us. So just those two things I want to start with. That one, you're a leader, and two, that God has something great for you. You may be walking in here with frustrations, disappointments, heartaches, things you're dealing with family, with friends, with your job, and we just want to start there, that this is going to be a night of encouragement. It's going to be a night of you being able to just come a little bit closer to Jesus. And so that's what we're praying. That's what we've been expecting. That's what we've been anticipating, and so that's what I'm trusting tonight. So I've titled what I want to talk about, 4 Keys to Becoming a Change Maker. And the idea on this is that most of you are in your first quarter of career life. We just watched the Super Bowl on Sunday. We watched the Baltimore Ravens get off to a great start, and then the 49ers come back. The first quarter of life for all of us is really, really important. And that's when we establish a lot of things for who you're going to be. And so that's an assumption as well, that those of you in your 20s and 30s, you're still in your first quarter of career life. And this is going to be really practical. I want to dig into some things that hopefully will help you be successful when you get to the 40 or the 42 or the 43 and you look back on that first quarter of career life and say, well done. So the first thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the 4 keys for being a change maker in your first quarter of career life is understanding your calling. How many of you feel like that you understand 100% who God has called you to be? Anybody? Don't be shy. Don't be bashful. I can't see you really, but if you're raising your hands, so you feel a sense of complete confidence that God has called you to be something specific. How many of you are discontent with your sense of calling? You don't feel like you really know who God's called you to be. And specifically as it relates to vocation, how many of you would say, man, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing in life. I'm not sure what my job should be. I'm not sure what my vocation should be. I'm not sure what my assignment is yet. We did some research recently through Catalyst, and we found that of Christians, this is fascinating to me, of Christians, over 80% of those under the age of 45 don't feel like they truly line up with what God's called them to be. It's sad. So we're going to dig into this a little bit. Understanding your calling. So let's start with this. First of all, there's 2 callings on your life as a follower of Jesus. The first calling is a call to salvation, which if you're in here tonight and you love Jesus, you follow him, you've given your life to him, you've crossed over that barrier. So that's the first calling that happens in life. The second calling is to vocation. And we're going to talk about that specifically. Our purpose in life, what God has called us to do for assignments, for our purpose, and for our vocation. Let me give you a definition of calling. This is my definition. God's personal invitation for me to work on his agenda using the talents I've been given in ways that are eternally significant. Let me say that again. God's personal invitation for me to work on his agenda using the talents I've been given in ways that are eternally significant. The essence of calling is this, where my greatest strengths and my deepest passions intersect. Where my greatest strengths and my deepest passions intersect. Talent and passion. Or you could say gifts and skills. That is the core. Now, there's also some current realities of calling for all of us in this generation. And when I say this generation, I mean all of us, for the most part, being around 20, 30, 40s, is some things have changed in life. My father, for example, and probably a lot of your parents, had one career. So when he thought about his calling in life, he said, I've got one assignment. And he was a principal. He was a principal, he was an educator, did that for 45 years. The generation that's been before us, they looked at it and said, one career in life. This new generation, you're all about assignments. You're all about projects. So this is a new reality, is that when we look at calling, we have to understand that calling is something big. It's 30,000 foot level. When we start to drop down, then vocation and assignments become the things that fuel and live out and release our calling. Calling and purpose is being defined today by multiple seasons of vocational assignments. It's all about projects instead of one career. Another reality of calling today is that we tend to make calling and understanding what God has assigned us to really spooky and mysterious. And sometimes this is the fault of the local church. How many of you have heard before, well, from pastors, from those on church staffs, those who've been called into the ministry, man, I really feel like God is calling me to this new season. He's calling me to this new church. He's calling me to this particular place and time, this geographic location. We hear that all the time. For many of us who are in the business world or in the general culture, whether it's entertainment, whether it's we have a job in the corporate arena, whether we run a nonprofit, so many times we struggle with that idea of, am I really called to this? Is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? We tend to make it mysterious. And what I would say is there's some keys to help you see your calling really clearly. Let me give you a couple of these. Look at your childhood. What did you love when you were young? What did you just live for when you were a child? What are those childlike passions that if you could start over with your career, you might say, man, I'd love to go back and do that. What would you work on even if it was doing it for free? What would you work on if it was doing it for free? What are the turning points in your life? Those experiences, the people, the benchmark moments. Look back on those and write them down, capture them. Start to think about the places in time where God spoke to you clearly, the things that you remember in life. Those will give you clues to your calling. Find someone who embodies your calling and learn from them. I like to call these kind of people your calling clone. Somebody who's older, who you find that's in your life and you say, man, if I could grow up and do that, I feel like that would really be at that intersection where my talents and deepest passions intersect. And then finally, take tests to discover your strengths and your passions. Our work and vocation matters. It's meant to give meaning and purpose. Work is not meant to be a means to an end, but for so many of us who even come in here tonight, work is simply something we do to exist. But God has designed us. He's designed us for vocation, for assignments, for calling that means something significant and has eternal purpose. I love it when I see leaders who are in their sweet spot of their calling. And you always know it when you see it because they have tremendous passion, they have energy, you love being around them. So here's the assignment. Figure out what you're good at, what you love to do, and what you have the greatest passion for. Learn from those you know best. Look forwards and backwards, and then pray. For me, I grew up, and I thought that forever growing up, grew up in Oklahoma, went to a great church, the First Church of God in Bristow, Oklahoma. Anybody ever been there? First Church of God, Bristow, Oklahoma. Come on. It's huge. We had like 37 people on a Sunday. It was awesome. But I grew up with that sense that I was supposed to be a pastor. And I struggled with that for years. When I got into high school, I thought I had to go to a Christian college. And again, nothing wrong with that, believe me. But I always had that tension of, man, what does God call me to do? Is he calling me to be a pastor? Is he calling me to go to a Christian school? And so I ended up going to the University of Oklahoma. Go Sooners. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had sort of been released in this new place. And I'd always been a connector of people. I always loved to be around people. I loved to know people's names, to be part of a lot of things on campus. And all of a sudden, when I got to a secular school, I felt like suddenly my calling was able to run free, and I was able to pursue things that God had put in me. And so to this day, here's what my calling is. And I'll read this to you. My calling in life, this is for me, Brad Lomenick, is to be a connector, platformer, and gatherer of leaders that achieve kingdom purposes. My current vocational season, my assignment right now, is stewarding the direction and organization of Catalyst. So again, the true place where your calling is lived out is where your greatest strengths and deepest passions intersect, where passion and gifts and God's plan align perfectly. So here's an assignment. If you have something to write down this with, or you can remember it right on your iPhone, is when you go home tonight, tomorrow, take some time to write down your 3 greatest strengths. Your 3 greatest strengths. You know what those are. Ask your friends, what are my 3 greatest strengths, if you don't know what those are. Then write down your 3 greatest passions. That could be children, it could be the poor, it could be international ministry, it could be the homeless, it could be your family, whatever your deepest burdens and passions are in life. So 3 greatest strengths, 3 greatest burdens or passions. That'll help you figure out your intersection, where your calling will get lived out. So first is calling. Understanding your calling. Number 2, as it relates to 4 keys to being a change maker, making your first quarter of career life count, is create a legacy. Had a mentor when I worked on a ranch after college, Lost Valley Ranch. I rode horses for 5 years. It built me into the man of God I am today. If you've never ridden horses for 7 hours straight for 5 years in a row, here's what happens. You lose all the hair on the inside of your thighs, which is really disgusting, I know. You have really bad L4 and L5 problems in your back. And you learn what it means to scoop a lot of manure. A lot of manure. When I was at Lost Valley, I had a guy who mentored me. He was 75, the time I was 25. And he used to tell me this all the time. Every day it seemed like he would tell me this. He'd say, Brad, being a 70-year man or woman of God for you starts now. Your 20s establish the man or woman of God you will be in your 70s. And I thought about that forever, and that's what legacy is. Creating a legacy starts now. Be great now, not later. The way you start determines ultimately the way you finish. Use the first half of your life, use the first quarter of your career life to be rooted, planted, and firmly established. So that's the first thing under legacy. Your 20s, establish your 70s. Now, if you're in your 30s, the same principle applies. Your 30s, establish who you will be in your 70s. Start now creating your legacy. Second part of that, very business and very Bible. This is something I learned a couple years ago. This idea that we are called, all of us, our legacy is to be kingdom entrepreneurs. So many of us, we get this thing confused. We feel like that our life, if we're in the business world, is to just be in the business world, and occasionally on Sunday we'll show up and do church. Those of us who are in the church world or in the ministry world, we feel like that our life is supposed to be church, and then occasionally we'll try to live out what it means to be an entrepreneur, to be very business, or to understand the principles of leadership or personal growth. Those 2 things have to come together. We all are called to be very business and very Bible. The scriptures in one hand and the Harvard Business Review in the other. The scriptures in one hand and the Wall Street Journal in the other. The scriptures in one hand and Fast Company in the other. That's what God has called us to. As kingdom entrepreneurs and those who love Jesus and find ourselves on Monday in an office, a cube, a boardroom, we must see ourselves, all of us who show up in those places on Monday morning, as pastors, as kingdom ambassadors in the corporate arena. So very business and very Bible. Third thing underneath creating a legacy, own a vision bigger than what is in front of you right now. For many of you, you're trying to figure out how to pay your rent for this month. For many of you, you're trying to figure out how to get your car payment taken care of. For many of you, you're trying to figure out, how do I deal with the boss who's a jerk? So we've got all these things that are in front of us, and they tend to cloud where we're going. But own a vision in order to create a legacy. Own a vision that's so much bigger than what is in front of you right now. Take those lenses off. Be able to see into the future and start to ask God and expect God and anticipate God to do some things in your life that 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road, you're going to see come to pass. If you don't live in that way, all you're going to ever do is just look at what's in front of you. Own a vision that's bigger than what's in front of you. And the last thing under creating a legacy is perseverance. A platform and legacy takes time. Most of us aren't patient enough to spend adequate time doing something until we gain a platform of credibility. I love what Malcolm Gladwell says. He says that it takes 10,000 hours at least to figure out how to do something actually fairly well. And do the math later, how many years that is for you, 10, 12, 15 years, to become great at something. Credibility comes with action. It comes with doing, not just thinking or talking. Most of us lose interest, get bored, or just simply move on to something else. A platform takes time. We have to be leaders who are willing to persevere in order to create our legacy. So again, under legacy, your 20s establish your 70s, very business, very Bible, own a vision bigger than what's in front of you, and a platform takes time. Now, undergirding all this is the idea of character and integrity. Legacy does begin now, but let's take a minute and let's think about these two things, the idea of calling and legacy. First thing under calling is what has God called you to be? Who has He called you to be? What are those strengths, those deep burdens that you feel that He's put on your heart? And then when it comes to legacy, who do you want to be 40 years from now? When you're 75, 70, 80, 85, when you get to that point in life and you start to look back and you're sitting around with your friends and you start to say, you know, I wish I would have, or man, if I would have only, or I should have taken time to. Let's not deal with those kind of statements 40 years from now. So what we want to do right now is we're going to mix it up a little tonight, and we're going to take some time just to reflect. And during this time, you can pray, you can sit, you can reflect, but we want this to be just a sense for God to speak to you about these two things. I'm going to come back up in a minute and talk about a couple of other keys to making your first quarter count. But for right now, we just want to have this pause, a little bit of breathing space. Think about what God's called you to. Think about your legacy. So, number one, making your first quarter count. Y'all can have a seat. We're going up and down tonight. Up and down, up and down, up and down. Reminds me of two-a-day workouts in football, up and down. Number one, making your first quarter count is calling. Number two, legacy. Number three is excellence. Ooh. I'm gonna get on my soapbox. Excellence. Our goal should be to be the best in the world. Absolutely the best in the world. Especially as Christians, as followers of Jesus in our work and our vocation. Be great at what you do starting right now. Excellence is not just expected, it's required. It's required, it's an obligation, and it starts with you. We serve a God who's great. We serve a God who is perfect. We should strive to be that too. Hold yourself to a standard of excellence in every area of life. He who's faithful with little will be faithful with much. A couple of points on this, practical points. First off, when it comes to excellence, especially for those of you who are starting out in your career, set a standard that absolutely scares you to death. It's one of the things we did when we started Catalyst is we felt like the best way we could make an impact and make a difference, or one of the ways we could best make a difference, was to have a standard of excellence that was beyond ordinary, was beyond even what we felt like we could do. And so that started with design, it started with branding, it started with programming, it started with the look and feel of the way we create our events, it started with the talent we put on stage, everything. We just felt like that if we were gonna be an example, and we were gonna have leaders gathering, the one thing we wanted to show them was excellence. Culture is attracted to things done well. Be excellent in the ordinary. It's a great story. A lot of our Catalyst events, we have non-Christian speakers who we invite to come. And a couple years ago, we've been trying to get this one particular best-selling author forever. And every time we would ask him to come, he would just email back with one word, no. Every time, like he would respond like within 30 seconds, but it was no, every time, no. And about 8 years into it, he finally said yes. And it was like, well, okay, Brad, just wait at least 2 minutes before you respond to him, so it doesn't look like you're way too happy. And he's not a Christian. In fact, he would consider himself an atheist. And we wanted him to come in and talk about marketing and some things that he's just amazingly gifted at, and he's the best in the world. And he showed up at our event, and he was really uncomfortable. Like, he just didn't know what was going on, and like people raising their hands, and just all the stuff that when non-Christians come in your churches, you're like, dude, you're weird. I don't know what's happening here. And he walked in, and a friend of mine, I kind of assigned her to be with him just to make him feel comfortable. And he sat down in the room, and the first thing he said to her, not anything else other than, wow, like this production is the best thing I've ever seen. And nothing spoke to him, no words, nothing that I said to him, nothing that we prepared him for. The first thing that sort of bridged that gap between us is that we had built an event that he saw based on excellence. And later that day, he was leaving, and he said, I always thought Christians were just pretty crappy at doing stuff. Part of the reason I never wanted to come to your event was because I felt like that I would be leaning down to another level and showing up at something that was average. And on one hand, that made me so mad because we have this reputation in culture that says we're not very good at what we do. But on the other hand, it made me really happy because here was a man who has the pulse of our culture and speaks to a lot of people. And that was at least one time that we felt like, you know what, God was sort of giving us that a boy for setting our standards really high with excellence. Competent in our world is the norm. Exceptional is the unusual. God demands our best. So in your vocation, in your career, in your assignment, be the best at what you do. Be a great father. Be the best father in the world. Be a great employee. Be an excellent employee. Be an excellent spouse. Be an excellent friend. Be an excellent mother. Be an excellent child. God wants our best, period. Don't just shoot and aim for the minimum requirements. And how do you make your standard happen of being the best? Well, for me, it's pretty simple. Not everybody in the room is great. Like, we're not all talented. We don't have IQs that are soaring off the charts. We don't have the creative energy that a lot of people around us we look at and go, man, they're so gifted. But here's what we have, all of us, every single one of us. One, we have Jesus. And two, we have the ability to get it done. We have the ability to hustle. We have the ability to work hard. So regardless of your talent quotient, everybody can work hard. You can work your guts out. You can be a hustler. Accomplish getting coffee or making copies or working on spreadsheets or filing papers like it's the most important assignment you've ever done in your life starting tomorrow. I promise you, if we live out excellence, every single one of us, people will start to take notice. And here's the currency that the world trades, is when they see you doing something great, then they start showing up and going, you know, there's something about you that I'd really like to dig into. When we do our work crappy, when we do our work and our vocation average, but we put the fish on our desk, or we put the Bible next to the assignment we were supposed to get done, but we haven't done it yet because we're too worried about trying to share the gospel. And stay with me. It impedes our witness. So lead and live and act and create with excellence. Be an expert now, even before you need to be. Stay humble and hungry. Kill it in the now. Be known as a team member who's completely trustworthy. Be responsible and be a great finisher. God deserves excellence because he is, and he wants us to be like him. So let's take another moment here, and what I want you to think about, reflect on, is how is your standard? If I were to sit down with your coworkers, say, how's Jim, how's Sally, how's Betty's standard of excellence? Like, do they get things done and they kill it? Do they do their work incredibly well? Are they the best in the world at what they do? It's one thing to think about. What's your standard? Where can you improve? Where are you falling short? And again, this is about leadership, I know, and this is not the normal thing that fires you up and gets you motivated and on your feet, but if we'll pursue excellence as followers of Jesus, the world will notice. The world will notice if we're men and women who follow Jesus and live out excellence every day. So take some time, let's reflect, let's think about how can we be excellent and exceptional in our vocation. All right, number one was calling. Understand your calling, where your greatest strengths and deepest passions intersect. That's where you can find your calling. Number two, legacy. Your 20s or your 30s or your 40s. Establish who you are in your 70s, your 80s, your 90s, your 100s. Platform takes time. Credibility comes with action. Be excellent. God expects excellence from us. It's not just expected, it's required. It's an obligation, and it starts with you. So number 4 is more like Jesus. Passionately pursue Jesus. And I'm not talking about just an average follower of Jesus. We got too many average followers of Jesus in our culture today. We got too many average Christians who are walking around in life like zombies. We need passionate pursuers of Jesus in our churches, in our culture, in our communities. Why? Because it starts and ends with honoring God and seeking him. And here's something I've been learning lately, is sometimes the passion for Jesus goes away for many of us after years of following him. I became a Christian when I was 6 years old, baptized and the whole thing. Like, I look back on that time I can still remember coming up out of the water and feeling like, man, I don't understand this, but whatever it is that just happened to me is pretty amazing. And I walked out of there with such passion, such fervor, such a sense of, you know what, I want my life to count for something great. And I want God to use me and use me to accomplish his purposes. And over the last 33, 34 years, and there's been times when I felt like I wasn't even a Christian. There's been times when I've been on the mountain. There's been times when I've been in the valley. But here's what I know, is that Jesus never goes away. The Holy Spirit never leaves us or forsakes us. And God still wants what's best for us. So some of you tonight, you may be here again with that sense of, man, I'm not even sure I'm a Christian anymore. I'm not even sure what this means. I'm not even sure. I'm not seeing it in my life. I'm not feeling the passion. I'm not feeling the burden. When people are standing around me like they're singing and they're lifting their hands, I'm going, I I don't feel that. And it's okay. But I want us to think about this. The level of grace with which God saved each of us, many times I believe is the reflection of our worship. And that's worship meaning everything in our life. But let's talk about worship through song and through singing right now. So many of us, we may have not been saved from a whole lot. We may have not been pulled out of the miry clay. We may have just had a life that was pretty normal. And so grace for us doesn't necessarily come over here and reflect and create in us this amazing sense of God has rescued me, and so therefore I must give back to him everything within me. You know, there's friends of mine who were so far from Jesus in their life, so far from anything that looked like following him. And just a couple of them have come to Jesus in the last couple of years. And when I take them to church on Sunday, they make me look like I'm standing still. And they don't even know what this means. They're just like, come on, whatever everybody else is doing, if it feels like passionate pursuit of Jesus, I'm in. If it means me getting on the floor, if it means me laying down, they have no sense of all the stuff that we kind of put over to the side and go, well, we don't really do that here. We don't really do that here. We don't really do that here. They're just going for it. I'm reminded of the first time I went to the University of Oklahoma to a football game. And any of you who are college football fans, you know what I'm talking about. You walk into these stadiums and 75,000 people, when you make a first down, they're going nuts. When you make a touchdown, they're really going nuts. There's a great picture of an Oklahoma game that I have framed, and it's this guy, I don't even know who it was, he caught a touchdown in the end zone, and it showed the entire side of the stadium. And every single person in the stadium is just doing this. Like, yes, touchdown. Which I love that. But how much more, come on, how much more should we be giving back to our King, our Savior, of who we are than just the menial, I'm here. And it's not just singing, it's all of our life. It's the way that we pursue Jesus in everything. So, passionately pursuing Jesus, passion for God, the level of grace in our lives determines the passion with which we worship, which should lead to joy. And when we gather together here as PhoenixONE, when we gather together at Catalyst, when we gather together anywhere on Sunday mornings, we should expect heaven. It's raining down right there. We should expect heaven to rain down and for the floodgates of our own hearts to open up. So here's what I want to do here. And this might be awkward, I don't care, because I'm going back to Atlanta tonight. I want to take some time for you to pray. And we're going to take a minute or so and just stop right now. Some of you may not even know Jesus. So if you don't know him personally as your Savior, then I'm not going to give you the words. Some of you, I feel like maybe dealing with that right now. For those of us who follow Jesus, I want us to just reclaim that sense of passion. The first love we found when he first rescued us, when he first found us, when we were nothing. And it might have been 5 years, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Let's just take a moment to find that again.